A body bound at the wrists and ankles, buried face down in the dirt. Not an accident. Not carelessness. Deliberate. Someone knelt over that corpse thousands of years ago and made sure it couldn't move, couldn't rise, couldn't come back. And the unsettling part isn't that this happened once. It's that archaeologists have found this exact pattern, independently invented, on continents that had no contact with each other, across thousands of years of human history. Somewhere deep in the oldest parts of our species, there's a fear so consistent, so universal, that it kept producing the same horrifying solutions over and over again. Here are 12 of them, and by the end, you'll understand something most horror movies get completely wrong. Humans didn't invent fear of the dead for entertainment. We inherited it. Number 12. The Red Lady of Paviland. In a cave on the Welsh coast, archaeologists found a skeleton stained completely red, dyed with ochre pigment so thoroughly it had soaked into the bone itself. For over a century, researchers assumed this was a woman, hence the name. Later analysis revealed the skeleton belonged to a young man buried around 33,000 years ago, making it one of the oldest ceremonial burials ever found in Western Europe. The ochre wasn't decorative. Many researchers believe red pigment was used specifically to mimic blood, to symbolically keep the body alive in some sense, or possibly to mark it as spiritually dangerous, requiring the color as a kind of containment. Either interpretation points to the same unsettling place. The dead weren't considered simply gone. They needed to be managed. Number 11. The bog bodies of Northern Europe. Peat bogs across Ireland, Denmark, and the UK have preserved bodies in horrifying, leathery detail. Skin, hair, even facial expressions intact after 2,000 years. Many of these individuals didn't die naturally. Tolland Man was hanged. Graubala Man had his throat cut ear to ear. Some bodies show evidence of multiple methods of killing applied to the same person. Strangled, stabbed, and drowned, seemingly all in the same ritual. Researchers believe many of these were deliberate sacrifices, and the overkill wasn't excessive violence for its own sake. It was insurance. If you believe the dead can return, you make absolutely sure they can't. Number 10. Jericho's plastered skulls. Around 9,000 years ago in the Levant, people started doing something genuinely bizarre with their dead. They'd remove the skull from a buried body, then rebuild the face on top of the bone using plaster, sculpting new eyes, a new nose, sometimes inserting shells for eyes, essentially recreating the person's likeness directly onto their own skull. These reconstructed heads were then kept, displayed, sometimes for generations, inside the homes of the living. Imagine your family for 100 years, keeping your actual skull on a shelf with a face rebuilt onto it. This wasn't horror to them. This was continuity. But viewed from where we're standing, it's one of the strangest things humans have ever done with a corpse. Number 9. The Neanderthal flower burial. At Shanidar Cave in Iraq, a Neanderthal skeleton was found buried alongside pollen clusters, leading early researchers to propose he'd been buried with flowers, deliberately, ceremonially. The flower theory has been challenged since. Some argue burrowing rodents may have brought the pollen in later. But the burial itself is not in dispute. Neanderthals were burying their dead with intention, tens of thousands of years before modern humans arrived in the region. Whatever the full truth of the flowers, we're looking at a completely different species of human, capable of a concept most people assume was uniquely ours: grief expressed through ritual. Number 8. Amputation burials. Multiple sites across Neolithic Europe show bodies buried with limbs removed after death. Not from injury, not from disease, but deliberately severed, and sometimes buried separately from the rest of the body. In some cases, hands or feet were placed in entirely different locations from the torso. Archaeologists interpret this as a direct attempt to disable the corpse, the same underlying logic as binding. A body that can't walk can't come back. It's one thing to imagine ancient people being afraid of ghosts in the abstract. It's another to realize they were performing actual surgery on their dead to prevent it. Number 7. The mass grave at Natak. At a site in Kenya dating back roughly 10,000 years, researchers uncovered the remains of at least 27 individuals, men, women, and children, showing signs of extreme violence, blunt force trauma, arrow wounds, several bodies bound before death. This is considered by many researchers to be evidence of one of the earliest known instances of organized human conflict, essentially prehistoric warfare. What makes it disturbing isn't just the violence, it's the burial itself. Bodies left largely where they fell, some partially in water, suggesting whoever did this wasn't just killing. They were making sure the dead stayed exactly where they were, unburied properly, denied the rituals that might have let them rest. Number 6. Skull cups. At Gough's Cave in England, researchers found human skulls dating back roughly 14 to 1700 years that had been deliberately, carefully modified, cleaned of flesh, shaped, smoothed at the edges, into what appear to be functional drinking cups. This wasn't crude desecration. The precision of the modification suggests real skill and intention. Some researchers connect this to funerary cannibalism, a practice in which consuming or repurposing parts of the dead was a way of honoring them, keeping them close, rather than an act of disrespect. To us, it reads as horror. To the people who made these cups, it may have been the deepest form of remembrance available to them. Number 5. The Varna Necropolis gold. In Bulgaria, a burial site dating back nearly 6,500 years revealed something researchers didn't expect from a period this early. Extraordinary quantities of gold. More gold in one grave than anywhere else on Earth at that point in history, buried with a single individual, whose body wasn't even present in the same way as the others. One particular grave contained a symbolic figure, a mask and gold ornaments arranged as if a body were there, without actual human remains. Some researchers believe this represents a symbolic burial for someone whose actual body was lost, drowned, or destroyed, meaning the ritual itself was considered necessary even when there was nothing left to bury. Number 4. Sacrificial retainer burials. In parts of ancient Mesopotamia and later in regions of ancient China, archaeologists have found the graves of high-status individuals surrounded by the bodies of dozens of other people, servants, guards, sometimes entire households, seemingly killed specifically to accompany their master into death. At the Royal Cemetery of one grave contained the remains of over 70 attendants, arranged in orderly rows, apparently having gone to their deaths without visible signs of struggle based on their positioning. Whether through belief, coercion, or ritual poison, an entire retinue was expected to continue serving someone in death exactly as they had in life. Number 3. The Windover Bog Children. At a site in Florida dating back roughly 7,000 to 8,000 years, researchers uncovered dozens of burials, including a striking number of infants and children buried with remarkable care. Woven fabric, carved bone tools, evidence of specific individual attention paid to each small body. What makes this site quietly devastating rather than horrifying is the level of craftsmanship involved in burying children this young. Someone, thousands of years ago, sat and wove fabric specifically for a burial they knew was coming. Grief, it turns out, has left physical evidence behind for thousands of years, in exactly the way you'd expect if losing a child felt then the way it feels now. Number 2. The Chinchorro mummies. Long before Egyptian mummification existed, a fishing culture on the coast of what's now Chile and Peru was already deliberately preserving their dead, removing organs, reinforcing bodies with sticks and clay, reconstructing faces with paint and masks, starting around 7,000 years ago. Roughly 2,000 years before the Egyptians began doing anything similar. What's genuinely unsettling is who they mummified. Unlike Egypt, where mummification was reserved for royalty and elites, the Chinchorro mummified everyone: infants, children, the elderly, regardless of status. Death, for this culture, wasn't a private family matter. It was a communal responsibility performed for every single person who died. Number 1. Stone-weighted vampire burials. Across multiple sites in Europe, from Poland to Bulgaria to Italy, archaeologists have found bodies buried with heavy stones deliberately placed on the chest or, in some especially disturbing cases, wedged directly into the mouth of the corpse. These are widely interpreted by researchers as so-called vampire burials, a term applied after the fact, but describing something very real. Communities so afraid a specific individual might rise from the grave and return to feed on the living that they physically pinned the body down or blocked its mouth to prevent it from ever biting again. Some of these burials date back well over 1,000 years, decades or centuries before the vampire folklore we know today ever existed in written form. The myth didn't come first, the fear did. The stories came later, built on top of a terror that was already old. And that's the thread connecting all 12 of these. It's tempting to look at this list and see barbarism, superstition, ancient people who simply didn't know better. But look again, and what you're actually seeing is grief, taken completely seriously. Every bound wrist, every stone in a mouth, every skull rebuilt with a new face is evidence of the same thing. People who loved someone, lost them, and were terrified enough, or devoted enough, to do something about it. Horror movies invented monsters to scare us. Our ancestors weren't inventing anything. They were responding as carefully and seriously as they knew how to a fear that never actually went away. It just stopped being about the dead rising from the ground and started being about the fear of forgetting them completely.